Well, I'm David Crystal, and I'm the author of the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language, or SEAL, as we like to call it. Well, as any author knows who's had to do a new edition, it's a real pain. You have to go back and reread everything that you wrote. Well, how long ago? In my case, the first edition was over 20 years ago, and it's like revisiting your younger life. So you read through the whole thing, and you know something turns up on every page. There are some obvious areas where you think, that needs updating, but it's surprising how many little points turn up here and there, every page. But then you see, you don't exactly know how the book's going to be used out there. You've got some sense of it, but you don't know everything about how it's used. And so this is where the press came in. Cambridge did a rather marvelous survey of a large number of people who have been using the book over the past 20 years or so, and asked them basically the question, which areas of this book need updating? Where are there gaps? And of course, there have been a number of developments which had to be taken into account. And so that information, along with my instinct as to what needed to be updated, brought the two together, and it resulted in the update, which was really quite significant, an extra 50 pages of new material. It was like writing a new book, on top of the existing book and integrating the two together. Fascinating experience altogether. Well, the second edition came out in 2003. Think back for a moment. What didn't we have in 2003? Well, the world of the internet very largely was in its early stages. Text messaging had really just begun. Blogging had just begun. 2003, no Facebook. 2004, no YouTube. 2005, no Twitter. 2006, no WhatsApp. And all these other developments over the last 15 years, each of which has brought a new dimension into the study of language, a new manifestation of language in a particular technological context. So that was the biggest thing, I think. But on the other hand, when you look through the book and realize all the social changes that have taken place over the past 15 years, all the changes in relation to gender, for instance, or in relation to forensic studies or cognitive studies, and all these areas of research, the big data that has produced corpus linguistics, made it such a huge subject these days, you realize that there are enormous areas that need to be investigated or represented that weren't there before, as well as lots of little areas that have come into being. The fact that the Oxford English Dictionary is undergoing a revision at the moment, has been for some time now, means that the knock-on effect of that, if you're studying Shakespeare, and suddenly you have to revise all the information about Shakespeare's new words in the light of those new findings that the OED were coming up with. So suddenly you find that there's a whole array, virtually everything that's happened in linguistic studies over the past 15 years has had an effect on the way in which you have to revise a book of this kind. I think the unpredictability of language change in relation to the internet is without a doubt the most important factor that any encyclopedia of English language has got to take into account. It isn't just the fact that a new variety, like, say, Twitter, comes along and suddenly we start using language in that particular area slightly differently than what we did before. 140 characters, after all, suddenly puts constraints on you that didn't happen before. And then you suddenly realize that that was just a short period in the development of language over the past 15 years, because in November 2009, Twitter changed its prompt from "what are you doing" to "what's happening." And you suddenly realize that there's a new kind of English coming out there now, more like a news reporting English compared with the personal English that was there before. Not so many first-person pronouns, I'm doing this, but this is happening, they're doing that. Suddenly you realize there's a new world opening up there. And then more recently, Twitter increases the length of its tweets. So you suddenly realize that in a short period of 15 years, a huge amount of language change is taking place with respect to that particular technological medium. Now multiply that by all the technologies that are out there and all the unpredictable things that are taking place out there at the moment. I mean, if you'd said to me 10 years ago, talk about the oratorical style of American presidents, I would have known what to do. I would have had my Obama really in my head, and I could talk about his oratorical style. And then what happened? We have a new president with a totally different oratorical style. That's got to be taken into account as well. It's the essential unpredictability of what's taken place in the last 15 years that for me has been the most fascinating aspect of the whole exercise. You know, there's an old saying in relation to language study, or in relation to linguists, anybody, do you have favorites? No, I don't have favorites. Why don't you have favorites? Because everything is my favorite. You know, what's your favorite word? What's your favorite domain? Oh, I love them all. You know, linguists do love them all. And that's the way it is. It's a bit like saying to a doctor, you know, what's your favorite disease? You know, you can't answer that kind of question. So the favorite is always the one I'm working on most at any particular time. And because language is always changing, what English was like yesterday, it's different today, it will be different tomorrow. You can never quite predict what your next favorite is going to be. But still, I mean, the favorite at the moment has to be Shakespeare, because in another world, I have a Shakespeare site called shakespeareswords.com, and that's been updated too over the last few years with all the new applications that are out there that can make that site so much more efficient and fuller than it was before. And so suddenly I find myself diving into Shakespeare in a way that I've never been able to do previously, thanks to the new technology partly, and thanks to the new research that's been done over the past 10 or 15 years into Shakespeare's language. And so for the moment, I'm a Shakespearean, but in a week's time, I don't know. From the very beginning, I wanted Seal to have an audio dimension. But it just wasn't possible back in mid-1990s. What would you have done? You know, put a CD in the back or something like that? It just wasn't practicable. But these days, with the internet being the way it is and multimedia and everything, it's become so much easier now to add that kind of dimension. Now, there are two aspects of the book that need an audio dimension. The first one is obvious. The phonetics section, the section on the phonetics of English speech. Just like Cambridge does with its English pronouncing dictionary, so there needs to be an audio dimension for the whole of that. You know, how do these vowels and consonants sound? How do these intonation patterns sound? And so on. So that's one big plus, it seems to me. Imagining how this is from a reading point of view is always a problem for any user. But now the audio dimension is there. But the other one is even more important in my view, and that's to add a historical dimension to the speech of English. I mean, there's lots of Old English at the beginning, and then Middle English, and then early modern English. Well, how did Old English sound? How did Middle English sound? How did Shakespearean English sound? A lot of research has been done into this, especially over the past 10 or 15 years. And so now it's possible, based on that research, to add that kind of auditory dimension. And so this is the main thing, really. Every extract that is illustrated in the book, chunk of Beowulf, a chunk of Chaucer, a chunk of the Paston Letters, whatever it might be, chunk of Shakespeare, altogether there must be about 30 or 40 extracts from the history of English. Well, each one of those I've read in the original pronunciation of the time, or with my wife Hilary's help for the female characters of the original pronunciation of the time. And this, I think, will be ear-opening to an awful lot of people. They will never have heard anything quite like this before. I've never heard anything quite like this before. And I think this is one of the big pluses for the new edition. The online edition is a tremendous idea, but it allows us to introduce this dimension in a way that wasn't possible previously. There's another aspect to the online edition, of course, and it's this. There are lots of pages in the book, and each double-page spread will have a link to some aspect of language out there, wherever it is, a link to another site, a link to another audio site, possibly. So there are some very good sites out there now which deal with accents of English and dialects of English. Well, you know, I can't illustrate everything, nor would I be able to illustrate everything, but people want to hear the range of American accents and Australian accents and things like this. So there are now going to be links, live links to the various, in my view, the best sites in the world that actually present this kind of information. And it will add a totally new dimension to the book as a whole. It's a way of making their reading come alive. It's also a way of saving them an awful lot of time. It's all very well reading a page about, say, American accents and dialects, and then saying, oh, I'd love to hear some of these. Where do I go to hear some of these? Do a Google search? Well, up will come 20 or 30 possible places. Are you going to spend all the time looking through all of those and deciding which one is the right one for you? No, I've already done it. I've already had a listen to those and thought, this is the best one, in my opinion. And that's the link I'm going to put into the online edition so that you can just click on it, go straight there, and hear my opinion as to what the best source is. This doesn't stop them listening to anything else, of course, but it, I think, will save a lot of people a lot of time.